The next conversation is no different. I'm going to have a fireside chat with Christian Faes. Even though he has a very, very Belgian or Dutch sounding name, he hails from Australia, but is one of the leading figures, I would say, in the fintech scene in the UK in particular. Christian, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you?
Robin, it's great to be here, and good afternoon to everyone.
Great. Well, thanks again for joining us. It's a real pleasure. Maybe just walk us through your background, what brings you here. Obviously, you're the executive chairman and co-founder of Lendinvest, but you do many more things. So maybe take us back to sort of the early days.
Yeah, sure. So I'm a lawyer by background, and I sort of like to say I'm an ex-lawyer. So I leave that to the professionals now. But I co-founded Lendinvest back in 2008, having arrived back in London from Australia, where I'm originally from, and we've built Lendinvest to be now a very technology-driven asset manager focused on property finance here in the UK. We IPO'd the business last year in London, which kind of was an exciting part of the entrepreneurial journey, I guess, for myself. But I'm now exec chairman, like you say, so no longer CEO, and I'm involved in a number of businesses, fintech related, and have a pretty active sort of angel fintech portfolio. And I'm also sort of have put together and chair the Fintech Founders group, which has about 250 members now. And we're trying to sort of build an organization that can be the voice for founders and entrepreneurs in the fintech sector here in the UK at the moment. And that's going quite well and takes up a bit of my time as well.
Great. Well, a fantastic summary, but we're going to highlight some of these aspects in a bit more detail now. Maybe just to go back to 2008, I think it was just in the middle of the financial crisis that Lendinvest was set up. I think under a different name in the beginning. But yeah. Was it because of the financial crisis that you saw an opportunity there in terms of the property financing market in general?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, I'd love to say yes, but the truth is, like I say, I was a lawyer. I was involved with a mortgage business back in Australia, so had a bit of experience with the industry. When I came back to the UK in 2008, I think the financial crisis was kind of starting, and the markets were really volatile. And I guess people that were watching this stuff really closely could probably see where things were going. From my perspective, I just arrived back and was keen to set up a mortgage lending business. It kind of ended up being the eye of the storm, and probably not the best time to be setting up a lending business, particularly in mortgages. But at the same time, it was kind of when there's disruption and things like that. I think now that I look back at it, actually, it probably was a pretty good time, but certainly didn't feel like it at the time.
Yeah, I can imagine the first few years are quite a struggle. But you managed to pull through, which I think, now you're, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you raised over time 1.8 billion pounds in debt and equity. You have more than 3 billion pounds under assets now, I believe.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah. So we're definitely a scaled platform, and I guess as the business, back in those early days, 2008, 2009, 2010, it was kind of like scratching around trying to find an investor, which was kind of like an individual. If we sort of fast forward to today, we have large institutions like JP Morgan is one of our biggest funders, Citibank, HSBC, National Australia Bank, and so on. So it's a very institutional base, and it's a very scaled business. And we've got a team of sort of 220 people, of very experienced engineers rather, and financial services people. So it's a business that has reached some scale despite sort of very early beginning or sort of slow beginnings in the early days.
Yeah, as you mentioned, it's now a listed company, so the financial results are obviously public. But how much growth is there still in there? You think, because in 14 years, I imagine that the market has changed quite a bit.
Yeah, great question. I mean, it has changed quite a bit. So when we first set up, we were very focused on specialist sort of niche products, so short-term mortgages. Then we went into development finance, and about 4 or 5 years ago, we went into buy-to-let financing, so doing sort of 30-year, more traditional investment mortgages. And we're lending about, some way over £1 billion a year, and we are growing at quite a rapid rate. But we're only just scratching the surface, actually, of what we can achieve with Lendinvest. I think the bar is set really low when it comes to tech enablement. Anyone who's been through the process of getting a mortgage, it's a very paper-intensive, often very backward experience. And so whilst we've been very focused on the specialist parts of the mortgage market, because that's kind of where we could have a bit of an edge, I guess, with our cost of funding. But as we've scaled the business now, we do, by the end of this year, we will have a home loan product, which will be sort of targeted at entrepreneurs or self-employed people. And the mortgage market is huge. So 350 billion plus a year annual originations. We're doing kind of 1 to 2 billion. So we've got a long way, and I think there's a real sense within our business that we're just getting started. 14 years in.
Yep, even now just barely scratching the surface. If I hear the numbers.
Yeah.
Does it also mean you plan to expand outside of the UK? Because, correct me if I'm wrong, but most of your operations and your business is still in the UK. Mortgage market is a global one, so I imagine lots of opportunity there as well.
Yeah, I'd love us to be a global business, but I think the reality is, as I was saying before, just in terms of just on the basis of those numbers, it really doesn't make sense for us to go and march into another territory and sort of try and sort of grow the business that way. I mean, we could probably 5x our business in our existing product set, and then we're sort of going into the home loan market in the UK in sort of the specialist way. So I think by incremental product growth in the UK is a much better strategy for us than sort of going to another territory, because property is quite local as well. So the systems and the technology that we've built gives us a real edge in the UK market. But if we were to pick that up and take that to Germany or the US, I think it would be challenged to sort of see whether that naturally gives us an edge. I mean, a few years down the track, I'll probably change that narrative, and hopefully we will be looking abroad. But I think in the near term, it makes sense for us to stay here and focus on what we're doing. Makes sense.
Will you still be involved in a few years from now?
I'd like to be. I mean, I think like Lendinvest is my baby. Someone was asking me that yesterday. I mean, I'm exec chair now, which is kind of my perfect role, because having been CEO for 12 years, and you're very in the weeds and very involved with management and sort of, line managing people and sort of hiring people and so on. But I'm still involved in some of those things now, not the line management, but certainly hiring and doing things like this, which I really enjoy, talking about the business and sort of, being a bit of a cheerleader, I guess, in many respects. I still sit on the Exco, and I speak with Rod, who's now the CEO, and I speak to him every day, but he's doing a great job, and sort of I'm involved, but sort of involved as I need to be, sort of trying to add value without sort of interfering, I guess.
Yeah, makes sense. So Rod is now the CEO of a business that's listed. Has that changed a lot since listing on the AIM market?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I was nervous about the business changing. We've always aspired to be a listed business. We kind of feel that it was really useful for us to raise our profile. It helps us continue to raise lending capital, and sort of helps us grow our business. But I was kind of concerned around what the distraction would be around the share price and things like that. Clearly, it was a distraction, the process. But we did it from start to finish in about 3.5 months, from the board sort of saying, yep, let's have a look at an IPO, to actually doing it. And now, post that, I think, it was a good milestone for us as entrepreneurs, but we've got a lot of staff that have been with us as well, some for over 10 years. So it was a great sort of milestone for them to sort of be a part of. But now everyone just kind of gets on with it. We're a listed business. Fortunately, the trajectory of the business is good. So, we haven't, touch wood, seen any sort of, big share sell downs. The share price sort of is moving in the right direction. I think, along with the direction of the business, we've kind of just done that like a project, as we would with any other sort of fundraising. And now we're sort of going with building the business. So it's actually been pretty good.
Yeah, great. You mentioned earlier that, moving to a new market would mean essentially starting from scratch, really, even though you have that track record in the UK. Does it make sense for you to become a bit more acquisitive and maybe acquire either talent or market share in other markets?
Yeah, so that is how we probably would enter another market, and we have looked at it. We have looked at a number of other jurisdictions, and I think for us, an acquisition would make sense. And we've got a large amount of cash in the bank now. We're a profitable business as well, so we have got the ability to do that. I think it's just kind of being conscious of the distraction that would cause, and also just trying to sort of make sure that the management team we've got, the technology we've built, that we still want to not just acquire a business and then sort of just bolt it on. We'd like to sort of have some clear synergies between the acquiree, and we can integrate with our technology and hopefully give us an edge in that market. So it's something that's on our radar, but I would say it's not something that we spend a huge amount of time thinking about.
No, interesting. Just being opportunistic, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and staying sort of nimble and sort of alive to the opportunity if it's there.
Yeah, yeah. You mentioned earlier, actually before we went live, that you did manage to follow a couple of sessions at this event. I don't know if you actually caught my opening presentation about the data, but just for context, also for the audience, there's about 26 billion euros went into European investment, almost 12 billion of which last year went to the UK. So UK is still very, very dominant, reigns supreme when it comes to fintech activity and funding in particular. How do you look at that from sort of the inside, because you've been in the UK fintech scene for a while?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I missed your session earlier, but I caught one of the sessions that was talking about it. So I got the gist of what you had presented. I think, yeah, particularly in the UK, we're seeing a huge amount of excitement around fintech, and I guess I was there in the early days when fintech became a phrase that everyone was using, and there was a lot of excitement around it. But I guess it's really, at the end of the day, just the tech enablement of financial services. So naturally, the UK is, financial services is a key part of the economy here. So I think it naturally has attracted a lot of investment, and I think it is going through a really interesting period. We want, in our Fintech Founders group, we want the government to do more. We kind of feel like there was a really good job of establishing here as being one of the homes or one of the leading places for fintech. But actually, a lot of the initiatives are quite old now, and actually, I think in some respects, the regulator is less welcoming to innovation than perhaps it was certainly in the past, and certainly we hear that from founders, and I think that's a concern. But yeah, the top line numbers are, yeah, we still continue to attract a lot of investment. There's some great companies being built here. I think there's some great engineering and financial services talent. So it's understandable that we do continue to attract a lot of investment, and hopefully that continues to be the case.
Yeah, you're also a fintech investor yourself. You're an angel investor in quite a lot of fintech companies. What do you look for in particular in terms of stage, maturity, sector?
Yeah, I'm pretty agnostic, so I'm happy to be quite opportunistic around not sort of boxing myself into having to sort of be focused on a particular area or size of company or whatever. I think I try and focus on companies that are part of the infrastructure of financial services. And having built a lender, I think I can, I've invested a lot of lenders, and I think, I can add some value there. But lending is hard. Building a lending business is hard. It's hard to scale. You've got to raise a lot of capital. You've got to get the credit right. There's a lot of moving pieces I think are quite difficult. I look at some of the infrastructure business, certainly like in payments, where they can achieve huge scale without some of the sort of challenges that perhaps the lender has to deal with in terms of balance sheet risk and things like that. So I try and focus on that. I'm really fascinated, and increasingly so, around crypto, and kind of see that as really the next evolution of financial services. I really believe that. And I think, we're going to see a more decentralized way for financial services to operate. And so I'm trying to sort of focus on that a little bit. But yeah, no, I'm sort of open to any opportunity as they come about.
Great. Well, you mentioned Fintech Founders. Maybe give a little bit of an explanation what it is and what it's trying to achieve.
Yeah, sure. So I think off the back of that kind of feeling that there's a bit of complacency around UK fintech, myself and a couple of founders we just really started having ad hoc events. I guess I found it interesting. So when I would personally reach out to government or senior ministers and so on, me, Christian Faes from Lendinvest, I might get some reception. But less so than if we have sort of 20 top founders in a room, and found that actually collectively we can have a pretty good voice, and sort of if we can coordinate things, we do get quite good engagement with the government. So that has sort of snowballed, and now we have, I think I mentioned before, almost 250 members. We've got a very active WhatsApp group where everyone's kind of collaborating, trying to be helpful. It's really good to see, actually. It kind of reminds me of the early days of fintech, where you go along to a fintech event and there'd be sort of 50 founders in a room, and kind of everyone know each other quite well. Now when you go to these events, you've got hundreds, if not thousands, of people there, and it has become a really big sector. But I truly believe that founders are really the people at the coalface of building the sector. They're the ones that are sort of living and breathing it, and bleeding it, and so it's good camaraderie to put founders together. So that's kind of the idea. It has really taken on a life of its own. We've got a steering committee now, and we've had a range of different events. We had the Chancellor into our last event here, and so we're getting really good engagement. And it's great. It's a nice group that's evolving really well.
Very nice. I think it was initially called Digital Finance Forum, now Fintech Founders.
Yes.
And I did catch a statement that you made. I think it was because of the anniversary of the famous Khalifa review, which was sort of a year ago launched as a plan to keep the UK fintech sector as one of the leading ones in the world. But it was quite critical about what has happened since, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I mean, I guess in some respects, I kind of feel that we have the position where we can be critical in the sense, we're not representing the banks. We're not sort of a government lobbying organisation. We kind of are just very raw. We're the founders that are there living and breathing it. Off the back, I think the government commissioned the Khalifa review because they sensed that there was this complacency around fintech. A lot of the initiatives were many years ago, and so I think the government really wanted to know, how do we take fintech forward? Like, what is a roadmap for success look like? And Ron Khalifa did a really good job. He was very engaging. Lots of our members fed into it, as did the banks and consultancies. Like, I think it was a really well put together report. And he delivered. He delivered a really ambitious roadmap for the future of UK fintech. The problem is we're over a year on now, and actually next to nothing has been done. I mean, there's a few things that have been announced, press releases and announcements was kind of the feeling, but actually no substantive progress is the feeling. And I think that's a real shame, because you sort of, as fintech founders, felt like, yes, the government recognises we've got to do more. What do we need to do more? And then they've been told, and then it's got lost with everything else. But look, I mean, we've had COVID. I appreciate this is not the highest thing on the government's agenda, so I don't expect them to sit there all day thinking about how can they help UK fintech. But it is a potential, it's a crown jewel in the UK economy, and I think they with a little bit of effort, we can continue to be a world leader, and that's what we'd like to see. Yeah,
well, at the very least, they have a plan and a roadmap, even if it takes a bit longer because of COVID and Brexit and geopolitical and wars. At least there's a plan in place, which is more than you can say for most European countries, I would say. Speaking of which, do you keep track of what's going on in the rest of Europe outside of the lending space? I mean, just in fintech in general.
I don't as much as I probably should. So I go along to the Paris Fintech Forum, which I love. It kind of brings a lot of European founders and companies together. I have a number of sort of friends with founders of different businesses across Europe, but I don't follow it as closely as what I should. I kind of blinked it on, thinking the UK is the place to be, but I know that there are a lot of other interesting jurisdictions that are doing some interesting things. So we probably should branch out a bit in terms of our focus.
Yeah. We only have about a minute and a half left, but I did want to ask, because you singled out crypto as one of these interesting spaces. I'm sure there's more, but what would you tell an aspiring entrepreneur with some experience and drive to go into fintech and to really innovate? Which sector do you think is really ripe for disruption, where there's still a lot of innovation to be sort of displayed?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that, and it's not necessarily on fintech, I think cybersecurity is a really interesting one. Like, if I was an early stage founder and trying to think something that can scale globally, and sort of is hopefully we don't learn through this war, that we're going through around the dangers of cybersecurity, but I suspect we maybe will. And I think people are quite relaxed about cybersecurity. So I think we'll see some big events in the years ahead, which will probably make people more focused on cybersecurity. And then I think crypto is kind of, it's early days. It's interesting because I think regulators are struggling to grapple with it. And certainly we've seen that in the UK as well, where it feels like the regulator is not that welcoming to crypto businesses. And so I think if you're a founder wanting to get started in a crypto business, you'd have to sort of think about where you set it up and what you're going to build and how you will deal with the regulator. But if you get through that, then I think, I do believe like the next Amazon, Google, and so on, I think it'll be built in crypto. I think that is the future. So I think that's a really interesting space. And if I was an early founder, I'd be getting into that.
Yeah, that's a very bullish outlook on crypto. So thank you for sharing that and everything else, of course. We're out of time, Christian. Again, thank you so much for making time in your schedule to join us virtually, hopefully in person next time. And have a lovely rest of the day. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Robin.